I think we've stabilized now on attendees, so we can kick it off. Welcome to this webinar. We'll be recording as far as practical things, so and hope to share this in bits and pieces, I guess. The content is very much subject to change, as Håkon will illustrate throughout this webinar. We're getting just a glimpse of what is possible and what we try to serve information in a good manner. So it's about an hour's webinar. We feel free to ask questions in the chat. There's also a Q&A section. It just helps us organize it a bit better, but I think either works. And yeah, I guess no further delay. We can kick it off.
Yes, so hello everyone. I'm Håkon. I work as a software engineer on Forma and specifically on the ecosystem side. So I've been focused on like how do we help third parties extend Forma, right? And to that extent, this presentation is sort of an introduction. We'll touch a little bit on sort of what Forma is for those of you who aren't super familiar. But we'll very quickly get into sort of the weeds of Forma extensions. So before we do anything, this is called a safe harbor statement. And the important thing is that most of what we say here is subject to change. And we'll show you things that we might be working on for the future. So yeah, that's it. So yes, agenda. We'll talk about Forma first, then we'll talk about extending Forma, then we'll talk a little bit about sort of how you create your own extension, and then we have hopefully a lot of time at the end for questions. My colleague Magnus, who's also a software developer, will be also answering questions in the chat as they come up. So feel free to just write down whatever you're wondering in the chat. So let's start really briefly by saying what Forma is. So Autodesk, we have sort of 3 clouds. There's Flow, Fusion, and Forma. And the thing we're going to be talking about today is Forma, which is the sort of the AEC version of that cloud, right? We are building solutions on top of this, on top of Forma, and we want to help you do that as well. So to make sort of a large and open platform, our long-term vision is that we need help from third parties. So it takes a village, right? Some tools in the system we can build ourselves, and a lot of tools will have to be built by others. So our long-term objective is to develop Forma as the industry cloud sort of for our industry, and then to enable BIM workflows across sort of teams that design, build, and operate the built environment, right? But to do this, we want to build an ecosystem. So what we're going to focus on today is sort of the initial Forma offering. It's very focused around sort of the early stage, very focused around early stage planning and specifically buildings. And over time, we will add more capabilities targeting other verticals and phases and sort of ultimately deliver across all these things. Something to note about Forma is, and especially relevant to software developers, is our release cycle. So there isn't a specific release cycle. There's no yearly or quarterly releases. We do release continuously. So Forma is delivered as any other SaaS software. So we do very small incremental updates. At the time of Jesper writing that LinkedIn post, there were 72 updates to Forma, and that just means 72 updates that are very visible to our users. But we can end up delivering tens or hundreds of these small increments each day. And that's not sort of, it's not to brag about how we work or anything like that. It's much more about letting you know that we're very well set up for sort of taking your taking in your requests and iterating really fast so that you can quickly deliver the thing you want to deliver. So again, the current thing we're mainly focused on is early stage planning and then into the design phase, and you'll see an example of like how we connect Forma to Revit later. We're primarily focused in the verticals of multifamily residentials and mixed use and commercial. And our typical end users now are architects, sorry, and multidisciplinary firms. So I'm not a salesperson, so I'm going to let a video from one of our salespeople to sort of demo the product in itself first. So the first thing we're looking at here is how you can use Forma to set up a site anywhere in the world. There's varying sort of data available. And then you order data based on the country you're in, and you very quickly get set up with the context. As soon as you have that context, you can also get, or that 3D terrain, you can also get the surrounding buildings, roads, other relevant things. And then you can start sort of pulling your own data into the project as well. So you can import your reference images, your 3D files. You can use our constraint system to sort of set up the bounds for your project. And then you can start designing your initial proposals. So what you're seeing here is our just sort of very simple line building editor, or basic building editor, as we call it. Then we allow you to we have a bunch more sketching functionality, and it's very simple to just sort of draw a building, set some heights, etc. Here we're showcasing our 3D sketch feature to do much more sort of detailed 3D changes. And you'll recognize that if you've been using Formit in the past. And here's our Explorer feature to just sort of rapidly test out a bunch of designs. So we also want our users then to use extensions, and we've built a Revit plugin as an extension to Forma where you can sort of send geometry from Forma to Revit. What you're looking at here is key metrics. So this is sort of different. You get different important metrics about your project as you work in the early phase. So we can sort of push more data-driven design into the early stages of the project. What you're looking at here is our floor plan sketcher. And what I want you to think about as you're seeing all of these examples is this is where we want you to extend. This is where we want to help. If you see features here that you think are interesting or interesting to expand, that's a good use case for extensions. So here you're looking at some of our built-in analysis tools. We allow you to look at sort of different analyses or different proposals at the same time. We have daylight, sun hours, solar energy potential. We have a wind analysis. And then we also do microclimate. So like what's the temperature at different places in the site? And we have a noise analysis. We also do rapid operational energy, and most of these analysis results are available through our API, and more are coming. We also have a predictive model that very quickly just sort of gives you a very good estimate of what the wind conditions on your site will be. And most of these things are exposed to the API, and more are coming. So you can both sort of extend this and build new ones. To summarize, there's sort of 3 pillars here you can think about. There's contextual data, there's design and automations, and there's analyses. And we are a bit opinionated in sort of what we think you should build right now. We think that, these are good places to start. It's not a straitjacket. We're not telling you have to build something that fits into this. But if you're looking for ideas for what to build, these are good places to go off of. We already have a few partners helping us build out this platform. So it's also a good idea to go and look in our app store in the product. Try to play around with some of the apps that are already there. So that was Forma itself. Let's start talking about how you can extend Forma. So the fundamental entity that you need to think about when you're extending Forma is the extension. Now, this is analogous to an app on Android, right? It's a container you package your functionality into. It is where sort of the base configuration lies. So security configuration, who can access this extension, who can use this extension, and sort of what where it will extend our UI. All of that's sort of defined in the extension itself. And the extension is an installable entity, meaning that end users can install your extension, and that's how you let people have access to your functionality. When you're building functionality, there's two different ways of thinking. You can either focus on building generic or general functionality, and the main focus here is that we try to give you as much freedom as possible. We're trying to make the APIs as rich, or the SDKs as rich as possible. But there's less guidelines. There's less things to help you do exactly the right thing. You're more on your own. We also have this concept that we call specific functionality that we're looking for ways to expand now. But an example of something there is what we call our generators. The main focus of what we call specific functionality is that it's about having to write less code. The integration feels a lot tighter. So it's more sort of embedded into our existing platform. And there's little to no UI work on your end. All extensions in Forma are owned by an APS app. So that's how we manage permissions. I hope a lot of you are familiar with APS from before. But if you're not, then ask questions. So as soon as you've built your extension, it's time for you to go live on the Forma marketplace. So we'll help you get there. You send us your app and a little bit about it, and we'll get it out there and put it in the hands of users as fast as possible. So we just want to help. We don't want to block. We want to help you iterate and get information about what's working and what's not as fast as possible. So let's start talking about sort of the general functionality. And the most important way for general functionality is what we call embedded views. So embedded views in Forma are just iframes that we place around in the UI. They're essentially your hosted HTML and JS web pages, and they're sandboxed within these iframes. A very neat thing about this is that there's no more sort of DLL conflicts. There's no more dependency conflicts between different extensions. So we can have many extensions running at the same time with almost no problems. There's 3 predefined positions in the UI that you can extend. So you can either choose to extend the left side, the middle, or the right side. But what you need here, you can just let us know if you need something else, and we're looking for more things to add. You can then, from within the extension, you can interact with Autodesk Forma through the embedded view SDK, meaning we have a rich API surface that allows you to sort of do anything inside of the iframe. We're trying to sort of expand the definition of anything as fast as we can. And then you communicate and delegate to the host app to do things. I'll show you a slide on that later. The main concept here is that you get to run on your own domain and then access sort of native APIs and services in the context of the user without doing any you don't have to do any login, for instance, inside of your frame if you don't want to. So to be a bit more technical here, the essential way that this works is that we're running a web app, and then your app runs inside in an iframe, and then we have this thin layer called the Forma SDK, which I'll show you examples of what you can do with it later, which messages between the two. And then you have, from within your iframe, you can do calls to your backend. So if you have some services that you want to connect to Forma, this is a good way of doing that. So you can have very thin clients if the thing you want to do doesn't adapt to the web so well. So now I'm going to go through specifically these 3 placements and what we envision people using them for. So the first one is the right menu analysis panel, and it's called the right menu analysis panel because we expect people to typically put analyses here. The thing you're looking at on the right is a colleague of mine, also named Håkon, who built a ray tracing extension. And what it does is it checks from a geometry which places on the geometry can see things. It's a very good tool, or this embedded view on the right side is a very good place to create these interactive analyses. So typical use cases are you'll read geometry from the 3D scene, you'll do some calculations or simulations, and then you'll visualize the results back to the scene. You can also use, as I said previously, existing analysis results. I'm not going to specify exactly what is and what isn't available because that API is constantly changing. So just look at our documentation and you'll see. But the cool thing about that is it lets you sort of do composite analysis. So you can take our results and then add more to them. So if you know how much sun is on the ground, you can calculate other things on top of that. The left menu panel is typically where we want you to configure your extension. So if you want to access outside resources, for instance, if you want to build sort of your own version of a library, this is a typical place to do that. Other things you can do is login, subscriptions. It's also important to know that these embedded views, they can share a domain and you can communicate between them using standard browser technology if you want to. So you could sort of have, you could do some login on the left side, and then you could either use floating panel, which is the next one I'll show, or the analysis panel to do other things. So for the floating embedded views are what I would say they're useful for sort of anything. This is where we're much less opinionated about what you should put in there, and you need more real estate. So unfortunately, right now, this is because of UI, essentially, this is mutually exclusive with the left menu panel. So if you click, it's the same interaction to open both. But we haven't seen many use cases for needing both at the same time. But that's sort of a digression. The important thing is that this is where you typically do anything. So the example you're looking at here is a Veras extension for using an AI to render more photorealistic images of the sort of simplistic geometry that's available in Forma. Yeah, that's useful. So another use case, which doesn't really fit into any specific position, but more about other things you can do, is these data provider extensions. So I talked earlier about how one of the core pillars of Forma is sort of connecting contextual data to the world around you. And here you're looking at the example of Plexearth having built an extension using the left-hand side panel that lets you see sort of different satellite imagery from different times. The important thing here is that you can use this extension framework to provide data to the users. So you can have buildings, terrain, vectors like roads, rails, etc., or different other map data. I think something I haven't mentioned so far is that there's no real difference between the placements. So from a technical standpoint, the SDK is mostly available from all of them. That might change in the future, but the placement is much more around user interaction than it is a technical problem in itself. So feel free to experiment with where you want to place things. So as I mentioned earlier, to communicate with the Forma web app, you need to use the embedded view SDK. So any and all information about the site is available through that SDK. On the right-hand side, I've just sort of taken a snippet of the available documentation, and which I really encourage you to go and read. But it's sort of the principle here is that we want it to be as simple as possible and as discoverable as possible. So you should typically be able to just write forma dot and then control space, and then get a list of sort of available functionality. And then, for instance, if you want to interact with the scene, you can either use our design tool or our camera or our render functionality. And there's a bunch of smaller functionality under there. If you want to talk to our analysis platform, most of the available functionality is available under the analysis namespace. And for geometry, it's under sort of forma.elements or forma.integrate_elements. You can also get triangles under forma.geometry. That's creating and reading geometry is sort of separated in the API. So important to note about this embedded view SDK, I'm sure I've said it many times already, but important things bears repeating. It's continuously evolving, which meaning that we add new functionality here every week. What you're seeing on the right is an example of Håvard, a colleague, releasing events into the SDK just now. It's driven by community needs. So come hang out on our forum, reach out on socials, do whatever to get in touch with us. And that's how we decide what next to build into it. It is what you need. So it's in the early stage of development now, and we're very much looking for the feature functionality that you need. Right. So that was general functionality. Let's focus on specific functionality. So this, as I said, this is where we're aiming not to sort of let you do anything, but we're aiming for you to be able to do specific things in sort of with a straitjacket on, but it's at least very easy to do when you do it. So I'm going to talk about generators here, which is this general concept we have for generating things. The first thing you're looking at is what we call a script-based generator. So what you do here is you just provide us a package with JavaScript, and then you're free to do whatever you want inside of that package of JavaScript. You can go and load some more WASM resources or whatever works for you. You run inside an isolated sandbox, and then we continuously call into this isolated sandbox to give you to render the results in the scene for the user. And we manage things like adding the geometry to the proposal, having sort of a difference between the preview and the save. These are sort of our concerns in this world. So there's no necessary UI on your side. The code you're looking at on the left side, aside from the cheeky little import, is essentially everything you need to do to just have sort of a draw a square and extrude a polygon with this type. And then, of course, complexity is added from there. The thing you're looking at on the right side is test fits parking generator, which you can go and play around with, which will give you a feel for what you're able to do with this. We also have this concept of HTTP-based generators, and the goal here is to build something that lets you connect sort of existing geometric generators that run on servers. So they don't, if it's things that's hard to get to run in a browser natively, you can run it on your server. We just need you to expose an endpoint somewhere on the web called invoke, and then wire it up through your extension. All of this is in the documentation, by the way. And we'll call into it when the user changes things. But otherwise, the interface is the same. You get the same, you can declare the same inputs. So to sort of reiterate on what generators are, they are essentially functions that process input and they output geometry. So you can think of them as like an abstract way of a draw. That's essentially what a drawing tool is in most drawing apps, just abstractly. They implement a very simple interface, and we manage all of the UI around it. So there's some limitations here, like we know when your function is called and you can't really have any state. So you need to think about yourself as being sort of a pure function. And there's the only thing you need to choose is whether you want to be a script-based or an HTTP-based generator. Because I've had some confusion around this earlier. You can here see the difference between what we call a script-based generator and an HTTP-based generator, just from a sort of an architecture perspective. The main thing is that you're either running JavaScript inside of our browser, or you're running whatever you want behind an HTTP API. Creating a generator is super easy. All you do is host to the generator service. Again, read the documentation, but what you're looking at here is definition, all of the definition you need to get sort of the correct tools and sliders for having the user draw a polygon in the scene, and then have a slider to sort of set the height. So there's one more use case I wanted to talk about, which we call third-party clients, and this is a different name we're using for this is connected clients. And what we're talking about here is how you can connect Forma to existing drawing apps. So I'll show you two quick examples. So two examples that's in production today is our Forma to Revit plugin and our Rhino to Forma plugins. And they're focused on sending Forma proposals to Revit or having Forma buildings being modeled outside of Forma and then continuously updated in Forma. I guess the best way to think about this right now is to say, here we're looking for things that do sort of low latency, high trust workflows, right? It's all about connecting these things and having them feel as connected as possible. To illustrate that, I'll show you an example here of our Rhino plugin. And what you see on the right is someone drawing some geometry in Rhino and then pushing it live into Forma. And this unlocks people, anything you can do in Rhino, right, to produce this 3D geometry, you can now use as sort of a drawing tool for Forma. So this is super powerful. And it's also powerful if you have other sort of more niche, smaller drawing apps that you're working on. So this is definitely a way to integrate with us. So these are the workflows that we have around connected clients now. But if you want to do something else, if you want to have something bidirectional or have something that's more sort of niche, either play around with it yourself or come and talk to us, and we're here to sort of also help you and guide you using the systems we have already. It's not all about building new functionality, but also helping you understand how the things we have today sort of fit together. And that's harder to do as it becomes larger. So just contact us on the forum, for instance. That's a good place. Right. Let's talk about how you actually go and make an extension. So what you're seeing here is just a small recording I made of making an extension. I already here have this sort of web page for analysis I've built, and the example for that analysis available on GitHub. I go to our extension management page, I create an extension, I wire it up to this APS app concept, which is what owns it. And then as soon as it creates, I fill in some details about myself, like what's my company name, which will show up in the store immediately, and then who should have access. So if you select all users of Forma, everyone will have access. I place a panel in a specific place. And by the way, you can also choose to only selectively share this with a few projects. So here I add a link to the URL for the iframe that I want to load into Forma. And then I copy the ID that I can now share with anyone because I've set it open to everyone. If this was my own project, it would recognize it's the same person and it would just be available in the App Store for me. Here, I'm adding it to my project or installing it, as we call it. And then it's available. So I've now added one of these right panel analysis extensions. I set some dates. And through the Forma SDK now, this thing is able to move the camera around to specific dates and then snap a bunch of pictures of the canvas and then store them as images and send them to the user. So here I can sort of get it's a very simple example to just make sort of a small animation of a sun analysis, essentially, or shadow analysis. Right. Okay, so let's dive into a little bit more code, like how do you actually use this SDK that I've been talking about. So what we're going to do is essentially make a very quick, we're going to just make a drawing tool that does sort of these floor stack buildings, but I think they can be a bit boring. So it's just going to sort of fuzz it. You can see all the polygons are just fuzzed around a little bit. So I'm just going to quickly talk you through which APIs we would use for that. So let me just get my laser pointer. So the first thing you need to notice is that we're importing this Forma object from Forma embedded USDK/auto. Now this is available as an NPM package, so just go and download it. That's really quick. And then it's important that you import from auto, because we do a lot of like auto wiring for you then. To get to prompt the user to draw a polygon on the scene, all I have to do is to say forma.designtool.getPolygon. Just note that those polygons, if the user decides not to draw a polygon, then it will just be undefined when it comes back. Then I'm taking that polygon and I'm just sort of stacking it on top of each other. I don't want to focus too much on sort of the business logic of that, but it's essentially just sort of taking a polygon, stacking it on top of each other and fuzzing the points around a little bit. And then what we do is we use this Forma Elements API to create what we call a floor stack element, which has this create from floors function. We just pass it a bunch of floors, and then we get an element back. And then we place that element in the scene based on the elevation of where the input polygon was drawn, and it's in the scene. And that's all the code you need to write a drawing tool in Forma. So at the end, I'd just like to point out sort of ways that you can engage with us. It's either through our developer forum, or you can come and you can read our documentation. We're planning to host a hackathon in Oslo on the 12th and 13th of February. So I think we have a sign-up link for you that we can share, or not a sign-up link, but like a way to show interest. And we'll have future webinars. So as I said, this thing moves really fast. So we'll keep the webinars coming with things that change, but this should sort of serve as a baseline for what's possible right now. At this point, I would like to open up for questions. So I can see Magnus has already been answering a bunch of questions in the chat. Could you start with the question from there, Magnus?
Yes, I have a really good question actually about this. By being open to third-party plugins, how do you ensure consistency of UX and UI language of ecosystem in Forma?
Right. Good question with a really, that's very hard. It is very hard. So there's sort of two approaches. Sorry? Yeah, I think there's sort of three things we're doing there. It's one is we're trying to sort of make these extension points, like it should be obvious to the user that they're interacting with an extension, right? And that allows you to do things a bit differently. But we've also opened up this design system that you can come and use. So there's a bunch of like standard components, like buttons or sliders or other such things that you might need for your app, and to get sort of a similar visual language to Forma. And we also have some design guidelines in our documentation. If before you sort of release your app on the store, we want you to try and get in contact with us as soon as possible. And some of our designers will help you out. So we'll look over the app and look for obvious things that you can do differently to be more consistent with our visual language. And this is just to sort of help the user, right? We all want to contribute to making this ecosystem as high quality as we can. Other questions?
I have another one. I have another good one that was asked just to the panelists. First, take the one that came into the chat.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Do you mean the new one? Is it possible to analyze geometry in Forma API to get, for example, geometrical information, volume, length, width, etc.? So yes, some of that is possible to do today, and more will be added in the future. But you're also able to do it yourself, right? So, but yeah, some of that's available. And is it possible by API to attach data in Forma to geometry? So data from other systems, or is tandem the purpose for that? Well, yes. So when you store geometry, it depends on how you store geometry into Forma. But yes, you can store, so you can connect properties to the geometry, but it's not necessarily very easy to understand what those properties are used for later. There are a few things that we have already documented, but we're working on exposing more of these parameters to make it easier for you to understand. But you're also free to just put sort of parameters there for later use. I don't think we should get into sort of the connection between this and tandem, because at this stage we're pretty different products. So great, awesome. The question from Paulos Hera, perhaps creating a list of components for the UI to be consumed by extension. So that is the system I was talking about earlier. We have all of these sort of small, they're very small, these components. We don't have any sort of larger functional components for you to consume. They're smaller and typically fix one or two small use cases. But that is a pretty good, if what you're hinting at here is having sort of a larger component library to do more complex things, that's not a bad idea. So Magnus, help me out. Do you have any other questions?
Yes, there was a question about is it possible to monetize?
Well, yes, sort of. So like the most important thing here is that we know that to build a sustainable ecosystem, your incentives are a large part of that. And we're working really hard to have a system for that that's as good as possible. I think the way what you can do right now is that in your extension, you can have these logins, right? So you can just connect it to your existing sort of login system and have subscriptions there. But more about this is coming in the future. We're very focused on making sure that we have a sustainable ecosystem. Other questions?
I think those are the ones that are that haven't been in the chat already.
Okay, great. I mean, if you have other questions, I really do stand by, like, we do stand by, just come to our forum and ask, and someone will jump on it as soon as we can. Or any other place. Come to our hackathon, and then you can ask as many questions as you want and enjoy building things. So there's one more question. Can Forma create like ducts, piping, etc. on import to Revit? So no, Forma is not. We're early stage focused, so our geometry is much simpler. It's more about sort of walls and buildings, right? We're not at that detail level now. And so there's a question about wind analysis area is small. Can it be expanded in the near future? I don't know. I don't want to. I can't really comment on what the people who work on the wind analysis will expand.
There was a question we skipped a bit up in the chat.
Yes.
And it's how to get access to Forma to start testing code. Is there a Forma NFR license through existing APS accounts?
That I don't know. Andrés, do you know?
So the NFR licenses, I believe, can be accessed through like a partner hub. I'm not sure like from what vantage point you're accessing kind of or need to access, but I think the best would be also to check to kind of ask that on a separate email, and we can also divert it internally here. But should be definitely a standard process for acquiring licenses.
I'd like to add as well that there's as far as I know, there's a trial, right? So, and I can't think of any functionality that's not available to extensions from within a trial. So if you want to go and test this right now, just make a trial and take it for a spin. That should also work fine.
To add, and I think July is correct that it's available through the Autodesk Developer Network as well for startups and individual developers or creators, I think.
Right, cool.
There's also some questions here on the Q&A section, like separate part, and regarding APIs for roads and rails. I believe there's some changes, or if there are endpoints for those objects.
So there's endpoints for reading out footprint geometry, and that's sort of just their 2D projection. But we're working on making that richer. I can say that much. And we're working also on making it easier to sort of to write that type of geometry back. If you have a concrete use case for it, I'm very interested in hearing from you. So let me know, or just send. I'm not sure if my email is anywhere, but send me an email or message on LinkedIn or anything. I'm sure there's some way to contact us after a webinar.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
But I think we're plateauing a bit on questions.
Yes, I think so. Should we end it here?
Yeah, there's at least a few action points. I mean, we'll make the resources available in the follow-up email, and also stay tuned for a sort of follow-up over the new year when certain updates might be more concrete, and we can share them with you all. And yeah, I think we can just recommend getting in touch to start that conversation early on. And yeah, I don't have anything to add. So great. Well, thanks all for spending some time of your day here, and we are very much eager to learn what went well, what could be improved. So we have some time to improve for next time. There's a survey that's sort of automatically appearing in your browser after this webinar closes. And yeah, it's like 3 questions. So let us know. Yeah, thanks all.